Okay, so today we are reviewing accidentals. Anything that alters a pitch from what it would typically be seeing it on the staff. Okay, so sharps, flats, naturals, double sharps, and double flats. We'll get into those. We'll talk about half steps and whole steps. That is a huge step in moving towards the next stuff we're going to be talking about. Things like scales and chords and harmony all are based on half steps and whole steps, so that's a really important one. If you're doing the basic version of the bell work this week, it doesn't get into that yet. The advanced one does, but we'll talk about it today so that we're ready to move into the next stuff very soon. And then we'll touch on what chromatic solfege means and what that looks like, okay? So, to get started, sharps, flats, these are the basic ones that we see all the time. All right, so if you see a note on the staff and there's no symbol in front of it and it's not altered in the key signature, you don't see that note sharp or flat in the key signature, it is just one of these letters. A, B, C, D, E, F, G is the music alphabet. It's like the alphabet, but for dummies. So there's only 7 letters, okay? So, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, over and over and over and over again. I hear some talking which is going to make this really hard for me and hard for the people who are trying to listen to this secondhand. Okay, so be with me. So on the keyboard, if I move over to the keyboard here, and I will show you a visualization of this in a second, the white keys are just the plain letters. Okay, so those pitches are this. Here's A, here's B, C, D, E, F, G, and then repeating on A. Okay, so just white keys if it's just the letter, you don't see sharp or flat. Kendra?
When you press the key, it sounds like a letter. Is that supposed to happen? What?
Oh, okay. I think you're visualizing. That's okay. That's good. That's actually a really good association to have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you see an accidental, a sharp or a flat or a natural, it's going to change that. Okay. So for example, if I take the note G, if I see a sharp in front of that G, or it's sharp in the key signature, it's no longer this pitch. It is right here. It's going to move it up a half step. So up to the very next note. All right? Up a half step. If I see G flat, it's going to take it the other direction. It's going to move it down a half step to the very next note on the keyboard. And I will show you that on a different visualization here in a second. If you see a natural, it's going to cancel a sharp or a flat. So like let's say G was sharp in the key signature, right? So usually G is going to be sharp when you play it or sing it throughout the song. But if it has a natural in front of it, it's no longer going to be G sharp, it's going to be G natural. It goes back to the normal, just regular old G, okay? Questions about those basic symbols? We see those a lot, okay? Quick but really important rule that maybe some of you don't know. Really important rule. Once a pitch is altered in a measure, so here's my staff, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's my measure. I've got some notes, la 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 la, okay? Here's one that's sharp, okay? If it's sharp here, if I see it later on, it's also going to be sharp. It continues through that measure, okay? It's going to continue on being sharp until you get to that bar line. Then if I saw it over here, it wouldn't be sharp anymore. It goes back to normal in the next measure. Or if I saw a natural later on, then it goes back to normal. But if you see it early on in the measure somewhere, and then you see that note again, and there's nothing else that indicates something is different, it continues to be sharp without a sharp sign in front of it, or flat, or whatever it is, okay? So just be aware of that. It's sometimes a hard thing to visualize, but it's an important rule to know. Questions about that? We'll see examples of that in music in the coming weeks. But okay, so here's that keyboard, again, showing you a better picture, I think, of some of those sharps and flats. So we were talking about G before. So here's G. If I want G sharp, I'm going to go up to the very next note. So that's a half step away. Whatever is closest to it is a half step away. So there's G sharp. Okay. If I want G flat, I'm going down a half step. There's G flat. You'll notice that they have different names. So this key is also A flat, right? Here's A. If I want to go down a half step, A flat. So it's got 2 different names. We call those enharmonic spellings, enharmonic notes. The same pitch can be represented in different ways on the staff. Okay? So that's something that sometimes throws people off because you'll see a note and it's actually the exact same thing as a different note. Yes?
So B and C will never be natural or flat?
They certainly can.
Oh, they
That's a
can?
great question, and that's exactly where I was going, so I'm glad that you said that. So,
Oh, wait, yeah.
what happens if I want B sharp, for example?
C.
Correct, so here's B. I go up a half step, so a half step is whatever's closest to it, right? So this is also B sharp. B sharp is enharmonic with C. It doesn't show you that on the white keys, I'm not sure why, but yeah, so this note could also be called B sharp, okay? If I have C, but I want C flat instead, here's C, down a half step, B is enharmonic with C flat,
Okay.
okay? So yes, you can have white. Good question. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody so far? What direction you're moving if you see a sharp or a flat? Because now we're going to move on to double sharps and double flats. You don't see these as often, but they do exist, and there's a very specific reason that they exist. I'm not going to get into a lot of it today because I don't want to confuse you. But just know that if you have a key, especially a key with a lot of sharps or a lot of flats, you'll tend to see these more often. So for example, if, how much do I want to explain? So if I see an F double sharp in a piece, it's going to move it 2 half steps to the right instead of just 1, okay? Instead of just going up 1 half step, it goes another half step, it goes further. And the reason you might want to do that, so if I go back to this real quick,
Because they can't just like make it the other note.
I'll tell you exactly why. So here's F, here's F sharp, here's F double sharp, okay? And you're gonna be like, well, why wouldn't you just write G? If G is also sharp in the key signature,
You wouldn't want to be G sharp.
then you'd have to write G natural, and you're writing something in front of it anyway, and so then it doesn't make much sense, and usually it has to do with like the chord and more complicated stuff. But yeah, then it's just as easy to write F sharp as it would be to write G and then with a natural sign in front of it. So the more sharps and flats you have in the key signature, the more often you tend to see double flats and double sharps. So just know that it moves it 2 half steps instead of 1. Okay? So if you're doing the advanced version, you're going to work with that a little bit. So 2 half steps equal a whole step. All right? So that's going to bring us to our next thing here. So a half step is going to be whatever is closest to that note. So if I say, what's a half step lower than B? So here's B. We're looking for a half step lower. We're going to go to the very next note, B flat or A sharp. Okay? How about if I say, I want a note that's a half step higher than D? Raise your hand when you've got that one figured out. What would be a half step higher than D? Michaela? D sharp or? E flat, right. You could say either one. Either one would be correct. Okay? Now, a whole step is just going to be 2 half steps away. So for example, here's F. If I wanted a whole step higher than F, here's a half step, here's another half step. So G is a whole step higher than F rather than a half step. Okay? So you just have to add 2 half steps together. Just keep counting up from there. So how about this? What would be a whole step lower than C? Raise your hand and you've got it figured out. A whole step lower than C. Whole step lower than C. I'll give you a second to think about it because it's going to be a couple things that we've talked about, right? Kendra, what do you think?
A natural or B flat.
A sharp or B
Oh.
flat. Yeah, A sharp or B flat. Yes. So here's C, 2 half steps lower, A sharp or B flat. All right, so 2 half steps, 1 whole step, same thing, okay? So this is an important thing for when we start getting into, like I said, scales, because they're made up of patterns of whole and half steps. And then chords, we have to be able to really carefully count half steps because that's going to determine what kinds of harmony we use. So this is an important thing to be able to do in order to move on to that step. So if this is confusing to you, make sure that you ask and get help because we're going to see it again. I guarantee it. So last thing, before you have some work time on your bell work today, let's take a look at our chromatic solfege. So now, if you see altered pitches within the music, something that wouldn't normally be there within the key signature, you're probably going to need more regular do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, because you've got stuff that's in between. You've got stuff that's in between. You've got things that are sharp or things that are flat. And so that's where all of these hand signs come in. You're going to be getting this in your folder for reference. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have all these memorized. I don't use them enough to have them memorized. I know a few of them. But we can look at this and figure out what would those things be, okay? So for example, here's do, here's re. If I have one lower than re, it's ra, and it looks like this. It's like a little hook, okay? Yeah. If I have, so this is showing you things that are lower, right? So here's la. If I want a half step lower than la, it's lay, and so it's more like that, okay? So you can see how it alters it slightly. If I want a half step lower than sol, it's sa, okay? If I want things that are higher, so things that are sharp. A good example, here's sol. You go up a half step to si, right? Here's la, and then li changes that way, okay? It's more like this. That's a hard one, I think, to show. But anyway, yeah, it usually just kind of angles it a little bit is what ends up happening. So those are the in-betweens that we don't use all the time, but you're going to see it sometimes in our sight singing examples, so you'll be getting this very soon in your folder, but you don't have to have it memorized or anything. It's just a reference. Okay? Just know that the few of them.
Choir gang signs.
Yes, choir gang signs, correct. All right? Questions about... Yep, I know. We're so cool. We are so cool. Questions about accidentals, chromatic solfege, half step, whole step. Anything? All right, very good.